Daniel, and we come to the fourth chapter tonight, and we're going to read about a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. And to get a background as to what's been going on, he's been ruling and reigning for a little over 40 years now, and he has expanded his kingdom to about the height of its extent. It's a big kingdom. It's a large world empire. He's powerful. He's the monarch sitting over the empire. And we remember going way back to chapter 1 when he had besieged Jerusalem, and the Lord gave it into his hand as a judgment to the people of Israel for disobeying God's words and God's prophets for a long time. He took Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah and some of the brightest Jewish men with him, and they were young men at the time, and he put them in the college to learn the Babylonian way. And we saw how Daniel and the young men purposed in their heart, and when they finally, not to defile themselves with the king's way, and God gave them a bit of liberty there. And when in chapter 2, about 4 years or so after the besiegement, and now the three boys have graduated from the college, and Nebuchadnezzar had a dream in chapter 2, and his spirit was troubled, and he was frightened by the dream, and none of his wise men could interpret it. And Daniel interpreted the dream for him. This is about 36 years ago, and he thanked Daniel for interpreting the dream. Daniel remembered the dream, interpreted the dream, showed him what the image was about all the coming world empires, and he was pleased. Oh, it's a truth. Your God is a God of gods, a Lord of kings, a revealer of secrets. I want to put you over the province. You're going to be the chief of the governors, and your three men are going to serve with you. And then we saw 23 years later, the king made an image of gold and wanted a big worship service based on music and false worship and forced worship. And the three men stood up to him in the third chapter. And now here we are about a decade later, and Nebuchadnezzar has a dream again. And I'm setting you up with all this because he just doesn't seem to get it. God's doing everything he can to witness to him. God's trying again and again and again, and God is being faithful and true and sending men in his path that can tell him the truth and interpret things. And he seems to get it for a moment, but he falls back to his old ways time and time again. And what we're going to see that he suffers from is the sin of pride. That's basically his problem, and pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Now, the way this chapter is going to work out, in the first 3 verses, it's going to be like the end of the chapter, because he's going to be talking about something that happened to him 7 years ago. And so I almost wish that these 3 verses were at the very end, but at the beginning, because he wants to tell this story to us, and it's going to be a 7-year ordeal that he's going to talk about, and it's going to be this dream. But before he gets to the dream, first he makes this decree after he had the dream, and then the interpretation of the dream, and then the experience of the dream. And when it's all done, he says this, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and the wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs! How mighty are his wonders! His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. And as a king is to communicate to his people, and they would have decrees, they would have bulletins sent out throughout the kingdom back in those days with messengers carrying them on horseback. Bulletins sometimes called bulls, B-U-L-L-S, short for bulletin, and they'd send these out. And here, what he does is, because he has a world empire, and by the time he's writing this, this is after everything had occurred to him, which we're going to learn of. He had been through a 7-year ordeal, and most of the world had heard about it. Did you hear what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar? Did you hear what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar? And now that he's recovered from it, like having an illness for 7 years, he wants to send this decree out so they can hear firsthand what happened to him from him personally and not the rumor mill. And so that's what's being written in this chapter here. And he sends the decree out to all people, all nations, all languages that dwell in the earth. And he wants to give, let's say, positive, glowing praise about the high God, verse 2, that wrought something toward me. And he's a powerful God with great signs and mighty wonders. And that the great God, his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. And this seems to be the lesson that Nebuchadnezzar learned. How did he learn the lesson? Well, now we get to the next paragraph, verse 4. And now we're going to hear about the history of the dream, and we're actually going to hear the particulars of the dream as it's described by him in detail. So in this bulletin or decree that he sent forth, maybe this entire chapter went forth, he says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. And he'd been ruling for about 40 years by the time that this dream came to him. And he really is the King of Kings on planet Earth. And verse 5, and I saw a dream which made me afraid. And the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. I just think that's interesting. Here's the most powerful man on the planet. And I know they say this about the American president, but who are we kidding? In the sense that the American president is part of a republic that has a constitution. Even if you disobey it, you've still got two other branches of government. You've got an entire legislative branch, and you've got a Supreme Court branch, and you really can't do whatever you want. He's not a monarch. This guy was. This guy didn't answer to a Supreme Court or a legislative branch. Everybody answered to him. He was a king of kings. He's the most powerful man on the planet, and he's scared of a dream? He's troubled by a dream? Now, I just for a moment, I'm not a king or anything. I am an adult, and dreams don't scare me. They never did. When I was in my 20s or 30s or 40s, I mean, after all, it was a flippin' dream. I don't care how bad the thing was. Once I was awake, it was a dream. I put no stock in it whatsoever. I had no fear of dreams. You would think a guy with his balance and his sense, not afraid, and I just an ordinary worker, run-of-the-mill nobody in the United States of America, and I wasn't afraid of him. This guy is troubled by his dreams. Now, maybe I could be troubled. I really wouldn't. But let's say I had a dream, a recurring dream of me dying. Perhaps when I woke up, it might trouble me a little bit when I was in an unsaved state. Although when I was in an unsaved state, I kept putting death way off at the end and didn't think about it. But here's this man with all this power, and this man is troubled by dreams. The dream made me afraid. The same thing happened in the second chapter, when he had that dream 30-something years ago, almost 40 years ago. And it's just an interesting thing. And I think perhaps when God gives dreams to someone, he can trouble them and make them afraid. And I must have been lucky that all the dreams I had were due to anchovies and pepperoni pizza, and they weren't really due to God trying to reach in and trouble me. But he reached in and troubled this man, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head, verse 5, were troubling me. And so what am I going to do? I wake up and I made a decree. Bring to me all the wise men of Babylon. Bring them before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. And so then came in the magicians and the astrologers and the Chaldeans, which were a religious priestly class in Babylon, and the soothsayers. And I told the dream before them. Remember in chapter 2, he couldn't remember his dream. And so when he brought them in, he said, "You got to tell me what the dream was." I said, "We don't know what the dream is. Only the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh know these things." And thankfully, Daniel began to pray, and the God of heaven revealed the dream to Daniel. But this time he remembers the dream. He has recall here. And I let them know, but they did not make known to me the interpretation thereof. Why is that? They're ignorant. I mean, look at the soothsayers. I was looking in the book of Acts, chapter 16, and I remember when Paul got the Macedonian vision, and he went over to Macedonia, and he's there, and he's praying by the riverside, and he meets Lydia, and he tells her about the Lord, and her heart is open. She attended to the things spoken of by Paul, and she was baptized, and she gave Paul a place to live in the city, and he stayed there, and he continued to preach. And in Acts 16:16, it came to pass, as we went to prayer, a certain damsel, possessed with a spirit of divination, met us, which brought her masters much gain by soothsaying. Soothsaying is another spirit. And one of the things we're going to learn about this Nebuchadnezzar character is basically he's an idolater at heart. I mean, look at the wise men he has in verse 6 and 7. He has magicians, not Jewish men that read the Bible. I mean, why isn't Daniel and Hananiah and Azariah there as part of his inner court? He's got a job for them, a civil service job, and maybe they're well paid, but they're not part of the court. He's got astrologers, magicians, soothsayers, Chaldean priests, who be like Roman Catholic priests. They don't know any more about God than your average football player or does, or your average poker dealer does. They don't know anything about the God of the Bible. He's got a court full of people where no one knows the Lord. And they come before him, and they can't give him the interpretation of the dream. Well, duh, no kidding. I mean, how did me just see what said in the book of Luke, chapter 10. And Jesus said, in that hour, Jesus rejoiced in spirit, and he said, "I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth." This is Luke 10:21. Thou hast hid these things from the wise and the prudent, and the soothsayers, and the Chaldeans, and hast revealed them unto babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in thy sight. Because all things are delivered to me of the Father. No man knoweth who the Son is but the Father, and who the Father is but the Son, and he to whom the Son will reveal him. And of course these men can't make this interpretation. No, they don't know the Father or the Son. They don't know truth. So in verse 8, at the last, after I've tried every resort possible, we've done the tea leaves, we've had the tarot cards, we've looked into the liver, we've tried everything we can. Finally, we call Daniel, comes in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. And here's an idolater at heart, this Nebuchadnezzar. Despite the witness that he has received from these Jewish men who've been probably speaking with him on and off for the last 40 years, he has not received the testimony. He's occasionally, with his arm twisted, given lip service for a moment, but he hasn't received the testimony. You can see by the court of the wise men around him. You can see by the very last resort. I'm not bringing Daniel in until the end. And what's Daniel's name? Well, I don't like that name, Daniel, because that's the name, a biblical name based on the God of the Bible. I like to give him the name of my God, Belteshazzar. Baal. And in whom is not the Spirit of the Most High God or the Creator of heaven and earth, but look at the Spirit of the holy gods. This man is an idolater. And I before him, I told him the dream. And I said in verse 9, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the Spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee. What are you forgetting? Are you having amnesia? Don't you remember when he revealed a dream to you? You could not remember. You fell on your face and you said, of a truth, your God is the God of gods. He's a Lord of kings. He's a revealer of secrets. Well, I just said that for a moment. I just prayed that prayer and Daniel went away and then I forgot about it. I know, master of the magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. Verse 9, no secret troubleth thee. Tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen and the interpretation thereof. And now from verses 10 through 18, he's going to tell us the dream. He recalls the dream, he remembers it, and he remembers the details. Verse 10, and thus, and these were the visions of my head in my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew, was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. And then I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, behold, a watcher, and a holy one came down from heaven, and he cried aloud and said thus, hew down the tree and cut off his branches and shake off his leaves and scatter his fruit, lest the beasts get away, let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth, and let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers and by the demand of the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, for as much as all the wise men of my kingdom were not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. And so he lays the whole thing out before Daniel. Now, I got to admit, I struggled with this. I'm trying to understand what's going on here, and I had to do word studies that I laid out for you and your notes. I had to look verse 10. First thing he noticed, when I saw this tree, its location was in the midst of the earth. And so I did a study on the midst of the earth. And that phrase is found 5 times in the Bible. And as I was studying through it, the very first time it's ever found is in the book of Genesis. And the reference there in the book of Genesis, let me find it, 48, and I'll read it for you. Genesis chapter 48 and verse 16. And this is Jacob. And Jacob is blessing Joseph in verse 15. And he's saying to his son, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life unto this day, the angel, with a capital A, that's the angel of the Lord that appeared before him and wrestled with him, the angel which redeemed me from all evil. Bless the lads, and let my name be on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them, this is the nation of Israel, grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And the first thing I'm seeing in the first reference in the Bible is the midst of the earth is a special place reserved for the nation Israel. That's what it's reserved for. The next two times you'll find that phrase is Exodus 8, verse 22. So if you want to skip to the very next book, look at it real quickly. And in the 8th chapter here, these are where the magicians, the plagues are being on Egypt, and the magicians are telling Pharaoh, look, the ability to bring forth life, verse 19, is the finger of God. The only one that can bring life is God. I mean, they turn the dust into lice. That's God's finger. And but he hearkened not to them, as the Lord said. And verse 20, the Lord tells Moses, rise up early in the morning, stand before Pharaoh. Lo, he cometh forth to the water, and say unto him, thus saith the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. Else if thou wilt not let my people go, I will send swarms of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy houses, and the houses of the Egyptians will be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground whereon they are. And I will sever in that day the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, to the end that thou mayest know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. And he repeats that the third time the phrase is found in the book of Psalm 74:12. And what he's saying is, the midst of the earth I have reserved for me and my people. That's what belongs in the midst of the earth. And Nebuchadnezzar's dream is he just placed himself into the midst of the earth. As we're going to see, Daniel's going to say, the tree that you dreamed, that's you, king. That's you. And here's someone trying to put himself in the place of God in the midst of the earth. Let me go on and show you more. The next two references, by the way, of the midst of the earth, the one is in Isaiah 5, and the other one is the one we just read here. And it's about usurpers trying to take the place of God, the place that God has set for himself and his people, the Jews. Not a good idea to try and take God's property and God's place. And so that's the first thing I saw as I'm watching this dream develop. Isaiah 5, verse 8, woe, curse to them that join house to house, lay field to field, till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. You're trying to get rid of everybody and throw them out in the field and other houses so you can take the midst of the earth. And here's Nebuchadnezzar. His dream is his tree is in the place that's reserved for God and his people. Now, we're going to continue the dream. We're going to see these types are building up as we go through. The next thing that we saw in verse 10, not only is it in the midst of the earth, the height thereof was great. Now, when I did a reference on the words of great and height together, they're found in 2 Chronicles 33 and Ezekiel 41, and they're both reserved for the temple in Jerusalem and the wall around Jerusalem. And God talks about the building of the temple in Ezekiel 41 as being great with a high wall. And he talks about his city, Jerusalem, having a great high wall around it. And so here again, we see terms that are reserved for God. Jerusalem, his temple, his people, being stolen by this man Nebuchadnezzar in his dream. The devil is a thief. In addition to a murderer, he's a thief. Thou hast stolen the words of God. Here he is stealing the words for himself. So God's giving us a portrait in here as to what's going on. The next thing I saw, verse 11, the tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached to heaven, and the sight thereof to the ends of the earth. It grew and it was strong. I looked for those two words together. Now we're going to find it twice in this chapter about Nebuchadnezzar and the dream he's having about himself. But the other two times you find it is in Luke chapter 1 and verse 40, where verse 80, the child grew and waxed strong in spirit. It's talking about John the Baptist. And the other time you read it is in Luke chapter 2, verse 40, and is talking about Jesus Christ, and he grew and he became strong in spirit. And here is Nebuchadnezzar's dream trying to take the growth and the strength reserved for the Son of God, and the forerunner going before the Son of God, the preacher that God set up. And again, he's just showing you this devil steals things, trying to steal the glory reserved for God, his servants, and his people, and his city, and trying to steal it. The Bible is a story mostly about God and about his Son, Jesus Christ, and about man. But it tells that there's an enemy, Satan, and he's at war with God. It tells about God's city, Jerusalem, over 800 times, but it tells about another city 270 times, that's Babylon. And it's the city trying to counterfeit and to knock over Jerusalem. And here in the dream, we're seeing this little by little come together. I don't know, you can do these studies in a perversion, you probably can't. But in the words of God, where every word is pure, you can follow these words and study along. He says in verse 12, the leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much. Now that where fruit and much is in the same verse is found 3 times by Jesus Christ, speaking about he is the vine, and his disciples that abide in him will bring forth much fruit. And we're talking about the discipleship of those who are in Christ, based on the words of God. And here is this tree trying to imitate that fruit. Religion tries to imitate what God has given, relationship and truth. Religion is of the devil. And so we're seeing this in Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar has the spirit of Antichrist. He's one of the 6 types of Antichrist in the Bible. And we're going to see more of the typology laid out right here. The fruit was much. What else? The fowls, verse 12, of heaven dwelt in the boughs, I don't know how to say that, and all the flesh was fed of it. Fowls in the boughs and flesh. Ezekiel 31, verse 6, that refers to devilish men. The fowls of the air, the devils. This is a man with a demonic, devilish spirit inside of him. Verse 15, it says, when the decree comes down to hew down the tree in verse 14, to cut the branches off, to shake the leaves, to scatter the fruit, nevertheless leave the stump in the roots of the earth with a band of iron and brass. And you read in the book of the Psalms about being bound in iron. You read about Samson, because of his sin, being bound in iron. The iron spiritually represents someone that is bound in sin. Nebuchadnezzar, despite the witness that he's received for 40 years, despite the truth that he's heard and tried to ignore and keep away from him for all this time, is still bound in his sin with the wrong spirit inside of him. And this is a picture of what he is. He's bound in sin. That's the spiritual. The doctrinal, you go back to chapter 2. You remember, I don't mean to go too deep with you, but sadly, Daniel's deep. Daniel chapter 2, you remember what the image that was revealed to him a long time ago, verse 31, the great image whose brightness was excellent, it stood before thee, and the head was fine gold, and the breast was silver, but the belly and the thighs were brass, verse 32, and the legs were iron, verse 33. And he's telling you that, and verse 39, the third kingdom is brass, that's Greece, and the fourth kingdom, strong as iron, that's Rome. And what he's telling you doctrinally is when this thing is revived, which we're going to see, is not only this historical, not only is this spiritual, we're getting a spiritual picture, it's a doctrinal prophetic picture as to what's going to happen in the future one day. And we're going to see that when it's revived, it's going to have the democracy of Greece and the republicanism of Rome and the strength of Rome in it. And so that's what he's showing you doctrinally. The more important thing I wanted you to see is the spiritual. It's a devilish man bound in sin. And verse 16, let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him. The beast's heart, you got to go to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Now, I did this study. I told my wife I struggled a lot with this, and one of the reasons I struggled with this is every commentator I read says that Nebuchadnezzar got saved in this chapter. And Nebuchadnezzar came to know God and he got saved. I don't think so. I'm sorry, I got to disagree with everyone I read. But the more I'm studying this out, I'll take a look at it, and we'll see. I think Nebuchadnezzar is about as saved as Constantine was. You have an idea who Constantine was? 325 AD. So-called the one that finally made Christianity the official religion of Rome. That would be the birth of the Roman Catholic Church, because he saw a cross in the sky and said, "Conquer under this sign." And supposedly he became a Christian. And my mother was a Muslim astronaut. No, he never got saved. And despite what all the books say, Constantine wasn't saved. He was a pagan heathen right to the day at the end of his life. As a matter of fact, when some people in the Rome area of Rome that actually knew the gospel said, "Well, if you've given your heart to Christ, the next step ordinance is to be baptized." He says, "I'll tell you what, why don't I wait till I'm on my deathbed to get baptized? Because I just want to keep right on sinning till the end, but I'll get saved then." That's not the testimony of someone that's received Christ. Nebuchadnezzar, I find in the same place, let a beast's heart be given to him. Go to Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 18. And Solomon making observations, "I said in my heart concerning the estates of the sons of men," boy, that God just might manifest them and they might see that they themselves are beasts. And, Solomon made a lot of observations as he wandered around, not just Israel, but the surrounding nations. For example, in Ecclesiastes 7:20, he said, "You know what I've seen? There's not a just man upon the earth that does good and sins not." Good observation. You know what he's saying? All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. He's right. And what type of a heart is it that sins? A beastly, ravenous, lustful, hot heart that runs towards sin. And so what we're seeing here in Daniel 4, let a beast's heart be given to him. Yeah, he's got an unsaved heart. Now, curiously, from a doctrinal standpoint, you look at verse 16, let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him. You already know doctrinally who that's talking about. That's the real Antichrist. The real Antichrist is a man. He's a human being. He's born of a mom and a dad. He's alive now. He's 28, 29 years old. I know he's somewhere in Europe. He'll get revealed soon enough. But the point is, he's a human being. But he's a human being that doesn't want to know God. And he's a human being that is going to go to John 13. We're going to study this in Revelation. John 13. But already the scriptures have revealed these truths to us. And we remember when they were at the Last Supper, and Jesus was troubled in spirit and said, "One of you shall betray me." And the disciples said, "Who is it? Who is it going to be? Who is it going to be?" And then the one lying on Jesus' breasts, John said, "Well, Lord, who is it?" In verse 26, he said, "It is the one to whom I shall give a sop when I've dipped it." And when he dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. And after the sop, Satan entered into him. And go to Revelation 13. And of course, we know that Judas was the Antichrist, the son of perdition at that time, as Jesus prayed, "None is lost but the son of perdition," and he was referring to Judas. And there was a son of perdition, a spirit of Antichrist in a man at the first coming. and for a very short period he was in Judas. I don't know how many hours he was there. But in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, there will be a man that will come on the world scene, and then what's going to happen to him, Revelation 13:3, one of the heads of the great dragon's beast, which has many kings, one of those kings will be wounded to death, and his deadly wound will be healed. And then all the world will wonder after the beast, and they'll worship the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they'll worship the beast. And the beast there represents the Antichrist. And when he's killed, what's going to happen is his human soul will leave him, and God is going to permit the devil to enter into him. And it'll be a man's heart that left, an unsaved human heart that went out, and the beast's heart, a devil's heart that will enter into him and raise him up for the false resurrection. And no one will know. They'll just see him get up out of the coffin and go, wow, he's alive again, not realizing he's being empowered by a devil inside of him. And God's permitting the false revelation. We don't need to go into that now, but that's what's happening. And so that's the man's to the beast's heart. That's actually going to happen to the Antichrist. Back to where we are. We're watching this dream, and we're watching all these particulars being laid out very carefully. This is a bad setup. This is not a tree that God the Father has planted. This is a tree that the devil has planted in an attempt, like Jesus said, every tree that my Father hath not planted will be rooted up. And this is a tree being planted by the devil, attempting to go in the midst of the earth in God's place, attempting to have great height, attempting to have its own fruit, but in the boughs are all the fowls of the air, and all the devils are in there, and he's got a beast's heart. And one other thing on verse 16, which we'll get to in a few weeks, is that verse is a key to unlocking the door connecting chapter 2 to chapter 7. That's a very important key, and we'll study it when we get to chapter 7. If you don't understand it now, it's not important. If you don't understand it even when we get to chapter 7, it's not important. All you need to know is Jesus is the Christ. The King James is the Bible. Get a tract, help someone get saved. We'll learn a lot of this stuff in the millennium. Guys like me, we study this stuff, and I don't even know what for, but we do. But that's a key verse to connecting chapter 2 to chapter 7. And that's been missed by a lot of our brethren in Bible Baptist churches, and we'll look at it when we get to the 7th chapter. The other thing that we're going to see, verse 17, this matter is by the decree of the watchers. Now, this is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is relating the dream here. This is not Daniel interpreting the dream. The words you're reading are Nebuchadnezzar speaking in the language he is familiar with. He speaks in, he'll steal some Bible words, but you'll notice very carefully, he won't speak in words that glorify God. He doesn't speak of God as the Most High. He doesn't speak of God as God Almighty. He speaks of things like the watchers and the word of the holy ones. He speaks in a heathen, pagan lingo, has lost men. Have you ever talked to lost men about religious things? Have you ever talked to lost people about the Bible? Do you hear the language that comes out of their mouth? They're not holy words. They're not pure words. They're attempting to get close, but it's like a bad game of horseshoes. Of course, they can't hit the ringer. They don't have the Bible. They're not saved, but they don't even get within 6 feet of the thing. They end up throwing the horseshoe over their head in the wrong direction. All these wrong words, you can tell the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Sometimes it's not that hard to tell who is the Lord's and who isn't just by the words coming out of their mouth. And I got to be careful there because I know a lot of dumb Christians got modern Bibles, so you hear stupid things out of their mouth, but they don't know what they're saying because they've just been trained in that garbage. But lost people you can hear, and this is what Nebuchadnezzar, the holy ones, the decree of the watcher. But the interesting thing is, God is permitting this dream to be given to him, to trouble him, to let him know, hey, buddy, sitting on the throne in Babylon, I want you to the intent, verse 17, that you, Mr. Living, may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. Now, historically, what God wants to make us to understand as we read his Bible Christians, as I heard some dumb Christians on DCX today who are getting patted on the back because they're going to try and save America through the voting process and teach Christians to vote right. Hey, dummies, what God is telling you is human government is base. Lost people, go to Ecclesiastes 5. I mean, there's spiritual wickedness in high places. Ephesians 6, verse 12. You are wasting your time trying to fix this country. God's not in it. He's not in it. Wood, hay, and stubble. I mean, someone started that at Eastern Hills Church when I was 2 years old in the Lord, and they had a big thing in the foyer there after they built a new building and wherever the heck it is, and 8180 Griner, now it's been sold to someone else. And they had a big thing, and all the people with their little ministries, and I was just 2 years old walking by, and someone had this whole ministry to save America. What do you think? I said, wood, hay, and stubble. God's not in this at all. It's not going to save a single soul. God's not saving countries. He's saving souls. Why don't you scrap your ministry and start passing out tracts? And of course, I got him mad, and I didn't mean it, but I was only 2 years old. You know, sometimes kids say the darndest things. Ask Art Linkletter. But human government is base. Ecclesiastes 5, verse 8. If thou seest oppression of the poor, violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter. This is common. This is what sinners do when you put them in positions of rulership. They sin. They multiply their sin. This nation was doomed from the start. You do know that. Doesn't it say something about of the people, by the people, and for the people? Over. Good night. We just started with a losing formula. Why? Because people are sinners. You let sinners vote, you know what they're going to do? 1 Samuel 8. You can read the chapter. Anyways, back to where we are. Historically, human government is base. By the way, look at that. Look at that. Look at only the beautiful King James Bible. Look what he says here. He give it to the basest of men. Look at that word. Look at it real carefully. Now, keep looking at it. Now, take the E and put it in front of the A, and then take the S and put it at the end. Beasts. The basis of men are beasts. It's in English. You can't get that in Hebrew. You won't get it in Greek because the Old Testament's not in Greek. But God says, I'll give it to you in English. Do you see it? Did you figure it out yet? Do you know how to do an anagram? There it is. Basest of men are beasts. That's what they are. Now, there's also a hidden prophecy in there. You'd have to go to Zechariah chapter 5:11, and there's no need to go there. We're going to be running out of time. I would like to finish this chapter tonight, wouldn't you? All the heads are nodding. Yes, obviously. And it's just telling you there will be an end-time Babylon. Now, after he relates the dream to Daniel, he admits one more time, O Belshazzar, the interpretation thereof, all the wise men of my kingdom were not able to make this known unto me. Duh. We're not surprised about that. They're lost. Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 8:1, who is the wise man? Who knows the interpretation of a thing? The one that has the king's commandment in regard to the oath of God. The only wisdom is the wisdom God gives in the word of a king, where there's power. And Daniel had that word, and those men didn't have it. They couldn't know that thing. But thou art able. But my men, they didn't know that stuff. They couldn't figure it out. No kidding. I've been trying to tell you for 40 years, Nebuchadnezzar, Mishael, and Azariah, and I've been trying to tell you, you've got to finally come under the hearing of the word of God and believe of the word of God. You've had you Gentiles, you walk in the vanity of your mind, having your understanding darkened. You've been alienated from the life of God through the ignorance, the willful ignorance that's in you because of the blindness of your heart, because you're past feeling, and you've given yourselves over to lasciviousness, and you work all the greediness and uncleanness. Said who? Said Paul in Ephesians. Yeah, not surprised at all. So then Daniel, verse 19, whose name was Belteshazzar, was a stone-eyed for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. Now, historically, the 1 hour means a 60-minute period. I mean, he was just like stunned into silence. I mean, as the dream is being revealed, and Daniel, much closer to the Lord than I am, and knew the Bible much better than I did, probably just standing there was all those words are processing in a minute, and he's going, "Uh-oh, this ain't good. This ain't good. I don't have good news for the king here. This ain't good." And I don't particularly want to have to be the one to stand in front of him. I mean, he just threw my 3 friends in a fiery furnace not too long ago. I'm not too crazy about having to tell him this, but after all, I have to speak what God shows me. But he was a stone-eyed. He was kind of petrified for an hour. I got to tell this guy that this guy could go off like a firecracker any minute. I don't know what he's going to do, but I got to tell him. And he says, and then Belshazzar sees the fear and says, the king said, "Belshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee." And as you can tell me, I'm not going to go nuts here. I just took 3 Valiums, and I'm kind of calmed down. And I've just had some good wine, and I'm real mellow right about now. You can tell me. And Belshazzar answered and said, "Okay, well, my lord, let the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies, because this ain't good." Got some rough stuff to have to tell you here right now. By the way, in this particular chapter, you see the 1 hour, and you'll see a phrase over and over 7 times, 7 times, 7 times. It's in verse 16, 23, 25, 32. And again, Daniel is a book of prophecy in addition to a book of history, and God's trying to give you keys to connect Daniel to Revelation chapter 17, verse 12, Daniel 3:15, this here, to show us that the 7 times is the 7-year period of the tribulation is going to be likened to the 1 hour of God's judgment on the earth. And so there's prophetical implications toward the final coming of the big Nebuchadnezzar, the Antichrist himself, and what God's going to do to him. So it's just prophecy mixed in here. Okay, so let me tell you, verse 20, "The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, the one whose height reached to heaven, and the sight there too, all the earth could see it. It was so big. And the leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field were dwelling, and upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It's thou, O king, thou art, that tree. Thou art grown and become strong, and thy greatness is grown and reacheth unto heaven, and the dominion to the end of the earth." Now I would like to think that the greatness would be, hey, a good greatness. Wow, you're a great man. But you could also be a great sinner, and a great idolater, and a great hater of truth. And I'm afraid that's what's reaching up there. And God is now starting to bug God. I've given you time after time after time, and the more I give you, the more you turn away. And it's now reaching unto heaven. Verse 23, "And whereas, king, thou saw a watcher and a holy one come down from heaven," and that's what you said, king, and said, "You down the tree and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him." And the Jews use the phrase, "a time is a year, and times is 2 years, and a half a time is a year." And if they specify 7 times, they mean 7 years. And he's letting them know, you're going to go through a 7-year ordeal here, king. God's about to put you through a 7-year ordeal. Verse 24, this is the interpretation. O king, and this is the decree of the Most High. Not a bunch of watchers or holy ones. Let me tell you who it is. This is the decree of the Most High, king. That's the one who's given this to you. And this is his interpretation. Deuteronomy 32:8. This is the Most High God that rules heaven and earth speaking. I'm telling you what he told me. These aren't my words. I didn't write this stuff, O king. This is the Lord directly speaking to you. Verse 25, they that shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee, after that thou shall have known that the heavens do rule. Wherefore, let me be your friend, King. O King, let my counsel be accepted to thee. Break off thy sins by righteousness, and break off thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. If it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility, I mean, God will he'll keep things peaceful for you like they are now. If you just break off your sins by righteousness. That's God. God doesn't change. This is what he wants. Is he wants you to learn the ways of righteousness, and righteousness, the more you get righteous, the less you'll sin. Hosea chapter 10, verse 12, sow to yourself in righteousness, reap in mercy, break up your fallow ground. It's time to seek the Lord. King, I've been here for 40 years. I've been waiting for you to call me for a Bible study. I've been waiting for you to bring me in. Get rid of those soothsayers and those magicians and those astrologers. Ananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and I, we'd be happy to give you counsel anytime you want. Why do you keep going to those guys? I mean, they all grew up, they all went to Ivy League schools anyways. Those institutions turned left a long time ago. Look, it's time to turn right. And break thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Go to the book of Proverbs, chapter 29. You can tell how any ruler, whether it be the head of a corporation, whether it be a pastor at a church, whether it be, anybody you know is in a leadership position, or even close to leadership position, working their way up. You can tell right away by how they treat their higher ups and how they treat the people beneath them. If they're always licking and kissing up to the higher ups, and they're always trampling on the people beneath them, that's the wrong heart. That's the wrong heart. And that's the way this guy was. He had no one to kiss up to, and he wouldn't look up to God. He refused to look up to God. He trampled on everyone else. Proverbs chapter 29, looking at verse 14. The king that faithfully judgeth the poor, his throne will be established forever. Would you break off your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor? God will take care of you if you do that. Back up in the book of Proverbs to chapter 17. King, you've got all this wealth. You've got poor people that are coming to you, and they have needs. Chapter 17, verse 5. When you mock the poor, you're reproaching his maker. God is watching this. That's an iniquity inside of you. God's been so good to you and expanded and blessed you in every which way. Please listen to my interpretation. All right. You've said your piece, Daniel. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to sleep on it. I'm going to think about it. Verse 28, new paragraph. And all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. About 12 months later, at the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon, and the king spake, and he said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? This man hasn't changed one bit. This man has harbored the iniquity and the rejection of God in his heart, despite witness after witness, despite God trying to reach him with dreams, despite God having to do a sign and a miracle and delivering 3 people out of a fiery furnace. Despite all of that, this guy hasn't turned one bit. And while the word was yet in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field, and they'll make thee eat grass as oxen, and 7 times will pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will." And the same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men. He ate grass as oxen. His body was wet from the dew of heaven. His hairs were growing like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird claws. And his mind went. You turn your heart against God, and he'll scramble your brain. And he brought it down on him, and they had to drive him from the palace. He was like a leper. They couldn't have him there. And I've got a book by the Folio Society in the room over there called The Babylonians, and this is part of secular history. For 7 years, he was driven away, and he was out. And yet, God kept the kingdom for him because he told him, "I'd keep the kingdom for you." God wanted to give him one last chance. Verse 34, "At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, I lifted up my hands to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that lived forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation, and all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth none can stay his hand or say to him, What doest thou? At the same time, my reason returned to me, for the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned to me. My counselors, my lords, sought to me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. And now I, King Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase." Some of the things I have there, because we're running out of time, it says in verse 32, "The Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will." You know he's going to give it to his son, Jesus Christ. Revelation 11, "And the kingdoms of the world are become the kingdoms of our Lord. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing," as God wanted man to know in his fallen condition, like Jesus said even to his disciples, "Without me ye can do nothing." And for these other people, the nations are a drop in the bucket. All nations before God are as nothing. They're counted to him as nothing less than vanity. Have you not known? Have you not heard? They're impoverished. I mean, he's going to bring the princes of the earth to nothing. He makes the judges of the earth as vanity. But I'm looking at this whole thing, and here's what I think happened with Nebuchadnezzar, because he lived one more year and then he died. But here's what I think, and I know some people think he got saved. I think what happened is, go to Psalm 66. And while you're turning to Psalm 66, I'm going to read something that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church at Philippi. And he said, God hath exalted his Son Jesus Christ, and given him a name which is above every name. And at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of things in heaven, things in the earth, and things under the earth, that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And we try and witness to people today that Jesus is Lord, and people don't listen. But there's a day coming when naked they'll stand before God, and the last words out of their mouth will be, "Jesus is Lord," and they'll bend the knee. And not only people, they fallen angels will bow their knee. And I think that's what happened here to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar didn't get converted. He was forced by being abased to give the confession that you're going to hear at the white throne judgment. He's full of the devil, and the Antichrist. And you're going to hear the Antichrist make that confession one day. Go to Psalm 66, and we'll end. Make a joyful noise to God, all ye lands. Sing forth the honor of his name. Make his praise glorious. And say to God, how terrible art thou in thy works! Exclamation mark. Watch this. Through the greatness of thy power shall thine enemies submit themselves unto thee. Not the greatness of his love, the greatness of his power. God knows there's people he can't win by love. God knows there's people that won't accept his grace. God knows there's angels that have already rejected the grace and the love of God. You know what he's going to do? He's going to bend them down, put them on bended knee, and they're going to say it. Verse 7, he ruleth by his power forever. His eyes behold the nations, let not the rebellious exalt themselves. Pride goeth before a fall. Nebuchadnezzar exalted himself, and God put him right down on display for all of us to see what's going to happen at the white throne judgment. That's my take on it. However you take it's fine by me. Just remember, Jesus is the Christ. The King James is the Bible. People need to be saved. Amen.